Thanks for joining us. My name is Bradley Butler, and I am the Executive Director and Curator at Main Street Arts in Clifton Springs, New York. I'm joined by Brian Chen and Martha Grover, two of the 15 artists in this year's The Cup the Mug online exhibition of drinking vessels, which runs through Saturday, December 7th. And thank you for joining us this evening.
Glad to be here.
And I'm just going to show a few images of each of your work as I talk a little bit about you before we get into the talk and studio tour. And so starting with Brian here. Brian Chen is a New Jersey-based artist who took to clay early in his college career. He apprenticed with Simon Levin for 2 years, nurturing his voice in wood firing and pottery. He pushed sculpture and soda firing during his residency at Carbondale Clay Center and is now setting up his own studio in Pittstown, New Jersey. And Martha Grover is a functional potter living in Bethel, Maine, creating thrown and altered porcelain pieces. She attended Bennington College in Vermont, where she received her undergraduate degree in architecture. And Martha received her MFA in ceramics from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. So again, thank you both for being part of this show. Really appreciate you both being part of it and your work. And so I think as we start here, maybe if you could just each talk about, what got you into ceramics. And we can go, well, Brian, I guess we were going alphabetical. We'll go with you first.
Sure. How did I get into ceramics? So I was a freshman in college, and I was trying out for the tennis team, and one of my uh, new college freshman friends that was trying out with me had made was making pots in high school and was super excited to show his new friends a hobby that he's passionate for. I remember in the moment was like reluctantly dragged down to the studio, but I had always liked working with my hands, and like really enjoyed the steep learning curve of what throwing was. And ever since then, I was trying to make carve out some time every day to stop by the studio during college. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. And I that's the first time tennis has come up when I ask a question like that. So that's interesting. But it's because a lot of times you'll hear people say like, well, I took this elective class and it just like hooked me. But it's interesting to think about having a friend be really excited about something and you're kind of like, all right, fine, I'll go look at it. And then
Yeah.
and then it's a thing that it grabs you. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, cool. And Martha, how about you?
Well, I first learned how to throw when I was in high school, and I absolutely loved it. I went to a public high school that had a very, very tiny art program, but I was lucky that the general arts teacher worked in a clay studio in the summer. And so he had kind of cobbled together this horrible selection of wheels. There was one that was either on or off, and the other one had low and fast for your speed control. And I would spend every study hall that I could in the art room working with clay, but I didn't actually know that you could go to college for ceramics. And I was good at math and interested in art. And so on paper, that came together as architecture might be a really great thing to study. So I ended up going to Bennington College, pursuing architecture, never having drawn a building in my life. And my freshman year, it was pretty good. We were drafting by hand and building models by hand. And so I was physically in the work. And then my sophomore year, we started doing AutoCAD. And all of a sudden, I was clicking a mouse all day long. And I talked my way into an intermediate clay class that same year. And kind of from that point forward, I finished my thesis in architecture, but I knew that kind of clay was more of my calling. So I then went and did a fifth year at Syracuse University to kind of cement my clay portfolio. And then, as you said, went to graduate school at UMass Dartmouth and then did all of the residencies. I was at Northern Clay and Red Lodge Clay Center and the RT Bray. I did 3 different residencies at the Bray and have been making my living as a clay person ever since I finished graduate school. So I feel really fortunate that I did end up at a school that had a good clay program and that I was able to kind of find my way back into it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I didn't know about the Syracuse connection. That's very close to us here. So, yeah, Very cool. And like thinking about architecture, I mean, does that I mean, do you feel like your architecture background, going to school for that, does that have any kind of effect on your work as a ceramic artist?
I think it definitely does influence me making functional work. With my architecture work, I was always thinking about flow paths and how people moved and interacted in the space. And with functional pots, you're always thinking about the human, where their hand goes, where their lip goes, all of those same kind of functional concerns with how the body is interacting with the work versus how the body is interacting with space. I think also my work being high fire porcelain, there's a lot of kind of structural concerns of things, how they move when they're in the firing, making things that will hold up to that situation. So I think some of the knowledge about structure plays into how I'm able to make the work that I do and not have it fail in cone 10 firing.
Hmm. Got it. Got it. Well, thinking about I mean a cup for instance, which is what we're focusing on for the show. With ceramics, you've got the form, you've got the surface. I mean, for each of you, is there one that is kind of like the thing that excites you more, or is it the combination of the two, or what is that for each of you?
For me, I love form. I love the macro. I love the idea that two systems are working together, that rely on each other, in order to have a completely different function. Which is, I studied anatomy, in college, so that's where most of my shapes and forms are coming from. So just kind of like losing myself in the biomechanics of how we move throughout the day is generally where I pull my shapes from, and that's what intrigues me most. It's what helps me chase my questions. Yeah.
Hmm. And you have you also make sculpture as well, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it does one or the other interest you more as far as asking questions that you can answer through art?
One or the other, as in like form versus color.
Like sculpture versus functional. Like is one more I mean, obviously one is more approachable for more people. If
Hmm.
someone can use something, then this is coming from a painter, you know. If someone
Hmm.
can use your art, then it's more likely that they're going to buy it, a lot of time.
Yeah.
So, but for you, sculpture versus functional, what is most exciting for you?
It's a mix of both. It kind of fluctuates between the two. Normally I'll answer a larger form question with sculpture, and then I will try to problem solve that and scale it down to have it kind of fit into the functional line of questions, which uses a different clay body, and working smaller requires your lines to be a little tighter. So the translation there is usually the path of questions, and then it'll bounce back into what other form question do I have, and I scale it up and I scale it back down, and it's just like constant scaling back and forth that usually goes on between the two.
Hmm, got it. And I know that because we have a board member who purchased it wasn't a cup at the recent Flower City Pottery Invitation. It wasn't a cup, but it was another piece that you hold in your hand like a cup,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not a cup, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, you want me to show you?
Yeah, what do you call those?
I've been calling them anti fidget toys. Um, it's like a weighted blanket for your hand.
Oh wow.
So you hold the ball and your thumb goes through, and it just kind of hugs your hand in this way, and you kind of feel the weight. It's a tactile object. Um, but yeah, it kind of goes back into that two body system, or like two things that need to work together that kind of have this implied different function, that comes from the body.
Hmm, wow, very cool. Martha, what about you as far as form versus surface? What are your thoughts on that?
I am definitely a form person. I spend more of my thought time thinking about the shape and the volume and the relation of the different parts in the piece, how the rim works, how the handle works, kind of how all of that comes together. I am terrified of a paintbrush. So I don't think I'll ever be someone that does decorative surface elements on my work. Although I say that, and then, who knows a couple years from now what'll be going on. But and I'm usually trying to find glaze that kind of accentuates the form rather than being the surface being the focal point of the form. Um, so yeah, so I'm definitely in that form category, and put most of my time and energy into those sorts of explorations.
And are your pieces wheel thrown and then shaped, or how do you make those?
Yes, they are wheel thrown and altered. So pretty much everything starts on the wheel and then changes shape and has lots of slab additions, lots of cutting and pasting and things put together. And yep.
And did you, I mean, is that something that was like a process that you took several steps to get to that point, or was it kind of like
I
a one time thing and you're like, oh, I could do that, and then
it's definitely evolved over the years. As I'm sitting here in my studio, I've got a cup that I think I made while I was at Syracuse that has tools in it.
Hmm.
But you can kind of looking at it. So this was probably 2002, so 20 some odd years ago. But it looks like it's kind of the infancy of my more current pots. I can grab one of those. Just compare and contrast. This is something that just came out of the kiln fairly recently, that there's I'm still asking the same questions, but things have changed along the way a little bit. But I would say change for me in the work happens sort of glacially, that I move something an eighth of an inch and oh my gosh, revolution in the studio, look at this new body of work I am making. So I'm definitely focused in on all of those little details of what if this, what if this, what if this, and then over 20 years things start shifting and changing. But I have been throwing and altering porcelain for quite a while now.
Yeah. Well, I think that those more glacial shifts, it just it gives the opportunity for more meaningful body of work over time, because if you're kind of shifting and trying very different things all the time, then you don't get to kind of delve into that one, body of
It's
work
definitely
that
it's definitely a deep dive.
yeah, yeah. Because I always think, and I've said this many, live or many, videos we've done with artists, is like the deeper you look into something, and the more minute the details you're looking at, the wider things open up for you, which it seems like it would be the opposite because how many kinds of, ways can you say the same thing? But I think the answer is many. So
I would have to agree with that.
Me too.
yeah. Um, well, why don't we take a look around? We'll go back to Brian and take a look around the studio and see what's happening in New Jersey.
Sure. Yeah, I'll step out from the center of it. But this is the main space. It's quite it's the largest space I've had, and it's like two-thirds studio, and then behind that table is all kind of kitchenette living space. I've got some shelves of work here. I'm working on some stained porcelain handles, kind of messing around with some surface stuff, and then here is a body of finished work, more of those fidget toys, and then some mugs, some bowls back there, some sculptures down here. Yeah, a kick wheel that I built in 2020, my table, and then just tools and shelves and photo space, and then these two big bowls. One's currently half being used for my cat, um, who is over there, and that behind the door is my tiny little kiln, and then some glazing stuff. But for the most part, that's about it.
Yeah.
I've got some new work tucked away places if we want to see that too.
Well, yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about your the handles on those cups.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about this before we started recording. And just I was saying how, I own one of your cups and it hugs right into my hand. And I think that judging from the way you talked about that, the other sculptural piece too, it's like that's a big part of what you're after with how things interact with the hand. And I've never held a cup that does that, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it's I think a lot about joint articulation and kind of the ball and socket. And it's this like relationship of how, two bones are interacting that, lays out a groundwork of scaffolding where, different tensions and pulleys can like pull something across a fluid ball joint that and in paleontology, those the relationship between the bones can like map out this imaginative story about how big they were, how they moved, the environments they moved in, why they, were chasing this prey or being chased by some other thing, and it kind of evolves into this like imaginative, what if situation. But that's kind of the world that I like to live in, and kind of pull, you know, shapes that don't really exist into the world.
Yeah. Well, it's so cool because, you wouldn't think about dinosaurs, you know,
Mm. Yeah.
when you hold the cup, but it's so cool when, thoughts like that can lead you to something that then someone has a one-to-one relationship with. And I mean, that's the same for, all especially functional work where you do have that, relationship using something. But it's just, these ideas can be so far removed from pottery, but they have a direct effect on it. And I think that that's really great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And is all of your work done on the wheel and then shaped, or do you do
Uh,
stuff or?
for my functional stuff, most of it is. But as I've gotten more into sculpture, I've been more okay starting my stuff off the wheel. And I'm finding that I miss throwing on the wheel because I don't do it quite as often as I used to.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And how about those other mugs where there's like a different piece for the bottom versus the top portion?
Yeah, let me go grab. So this was you're talking about these, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, thinking about making that, and is the bottom portion also thrown in some way, or how does that work?
So it is not thrown, but it is done on the wheel. So I throw the body first, and then off the hump, I'll put it back on the hump to trim it round, and then I'll add maybe a collar this tall with this part filled in so it's flat. And then essentially I keep adding clay and then I'll sculpt it down. The clay probably comes up like up here. I'll carve that out and then clean up all my lines, attaching the handle that connects to the base as well. So a lot of it is additive and then subtractive in this kind of sculpting manner. Um, yeah, that can be all done on my kick wheel. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, because I mean, my impression was that there were two pieces put together, but
I,
they're
I actually I wish it was like that, to
yeah.
be honest.
Huh. That would make it more straightforward.
Less straightforward, but more in line with the idea that I want to run with.
Mm.
That I'm finding, what are the logistics of actually having two separate pieces for a functional vessel that you need to be structural and it needs to work every day. Is it practical to be having them separate? But maybe, maybe it's just the solution that I haven't found. And also like mold making and slip casting isn't uh, quite as friendly for my brain in terms of problem solving. It's not everyone's
Mm.
cup of tea. But at some point in the future, hopefully I can mess around with the idea of two separate um, forms that rely on each other.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean the way that it come like I said, I assumed it was two pieces. They're treated differently. One is smooth, one is usually textured, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I have a more experimental version that I can show you as well.
yeah, of course we want to see that.
So I was the first time I had tried this. I it was in wood, so this is it's not attached and it's a
Oh,
joint, and I tie it in with sinew, which is muscle tendon.
oh wow.
Um, it works. It's a little chunky, and it sits a little far out from the weight of the mug, so it's a little heavy feeling. But um, I'd like to get more into this idea of functional sculpture to some capacity.
Hmm.
But yeah, haven't I that's where I want to kind of get into 3D printing and gang molds and that kind of stuff.
Wow. Well, I mean, that really gets to the heart of anatomy and biology where the ideas come from. That's I think it's really interesting to see.
Thanks.
Yeah, very cool. Well, Martha, would you like to show us a little bit of your studio?
I would love to. So, whoop, hang on just a second. My phone just
You're
decided to do
replaced by
something
flowers.
weird. Well, I unplugged, there we go. I unplugged my phone and it went to the kind of off screen. Okay, so we're gonna flip my camera and come on. Every time I hit the screen, it goes away. Okay, so um,
I see evidence
my
of a pet in your studio too.
yes, we have a very old puppy dog who you'll
Wow.
probably see in a few minutes. So my studio is in an old warehouse building where my father used to run a machine shop. And my husband and I moved here from Helena, Montana, about 10 years ago. And when we got to the space, the section where my studio and this is my husband's studio, and then we have right next door to my studio is a little gallery space where we're open to the public and people can come shopping. So all of the space was kind of the office space. And we ripped down some walls. So these were individual office spaces. I think this is where the quality control guy had his space, and then another secretary was over here. And so we sort of opened it up, but had this space as our studios. And then in a minute, we'll go into the large shop floor, which is now a community studio space that I run. So in here, I've got my wheel and my hand building area. I'm actually just coming off of doing some glazing and glaze firing. So when we go in the glaze lab, I've got a bunch of bisqueware. But my shelves look super empty because I just started throwing again earlier today. I'm working on a base for a big tulipier, and there's a whole bunch of handles going, and I don't know, stuff covered up. But let's go. Let's see. So there's, as we said, there's gallery space here. And then my husband, Josh, actually works for Scut. And this
Oh.
is kind of Scut Central over here. So if you call Scut to get tech support, this is one of the guys that'll answer the phone. He's got
Wow.
all of these like crazy controllers and, who knows what he's doing right now, but it's all Scut stuff. And then there's also some back stock of pots and um, a little checkout station and what have you. And then if we keep going down the hallway this way, we'll get to the glaze lab, which when setting up the space, this is a rather extravagant glaze space for two potters. But I don't know, I'd been to so many studios where people had, bags of raw materials sitting in the corner and it was so dusty. And like, I want a space that I'll be happy to be glazing in. So this is a whole bunch of stuff that is waiting to have surface put on it. It's all been bisque fired and is waiting to get glazed. I fired a 1227 yesterday that's cooling right now. So I've got, I guess, about 2/3 of what I had going left. We've also got some clay recycling space in here. All of my work is airbrushed. So this space used to be the break room for the guys. And then this was a bathroom space, which then I converted the shower stall into a homemade spray booth. So I can put the filter up there, and there's a attic vent that kind of vents out the space. And then we put in a big sink. And again, there's some clay recycling and whatnot going on in here. And then,
And just a quick question for the
yeah,
airbrushing. I mean, is that more common than maybe I assume that potters use that as a technique for glazing?
I think it depends on what kind of a surface you're looking for. With my work, um, standing next to anything that's finished, but like on one of these pieces, I might have a gradient that would go from one color at the top to another fade into another color at the bottom. And so one of the easiest ways to do that is to airbrush. So I do a combination of and spraying in order to get my kind of layered multicolored surfaces. So for me, it was necessary when we moved into this space to figure out some kind of a spray booth. And this was definitely more economical than buying, like Laguna makes a great spray booth, but it is quite expensive in comparison. I think this cost me about $100 in parts, and the Laguna one is over a
Yeah, you
thousand, or at
can't
least
beat
was
that.
10
You
years
can't beat
ago. Yeah, you can't beat that. So then out here, this used to be the machine shop floor, which is now a very large community studio space. And I don't think Josh and I, when we moved here, really had the intention of we want to set up a community studio. But we had a few extra wheels, and people started asking us, will you teach a class? And we got hooked up with the local adult ed, and we would do classes for like 3 or 4 people because that's all we had for extra wheels. And it just kind of kept growing. And it's actually worked out really, really well for me in several different ways. I mean, classes are great because it's known income, which, to be a full time potter can be tricky because people buy a lot of stuff at the holidays, but does that sustain you through the year? Or, if you've got a couple big sales, what do you do the rest of the time? And so this is kind of like known income. But I also do a couple of studio workshops here in the summer. We shut down our community studio for July and August, and I do some workshops where folks come from away, which is really nice. So there's a cone six glazing area out here, student shelving, and then our kiln space is over here. So we've got 5 kilns. There's a little baby kiln, my great big oval kiln that I do a lot of my glazing in, a medium sized kiln, this guy that's cooling right now, filled with Martha's pots for down to
that.
762, not quite cool enough to peek in, and then another big 1227 there. So we've
Surprise,
got,
surprise, they're all Scott Kilns, huh?
well, almost. This guy over here, don't tell anybody, but it is a cone art.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. I purchased that before Josh started working for Scott, but it's for Cone 10, it is a nice kiln because Cone Art makes their kilns with extra insulation on the outside, so that they go to Cone 10, and you can see how thick that lid is. Like it really, for this much, it's 16 cubic feet of volume for an electric kiln. To be able to go to Cone 10 is pretty impressive. But I do fire all the other ones also to Cone 10. Let's see what else is interesting out in this space. We only have community people here Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So the rest of the week, the studio is mine. So I quite often, like if I'm throwing big pictures or something, I will fill up all of these wheels with pieces kind of like gently rotating so that they dry evenly, or big platters or things like that. And then when Josh is doing glazing on the weekends, he'll often, take over all of the space because he fires cone six as well. Interesting retrofitting spaces, kind of thinking about how sinks work and how you're going to deal with all of that, especially when you start adding other people to the mix and it's not just 1 or 2 people, but you're dealing with 50 people and all of their clay slop and glaze slop. So that's been pretty fun to do. Interesting challenges to undertake. And then let's see, during the pandemic, my husband and I were living at my grandmother's farm, and we were looking at houses in the area, and we kept having the conversations of, how far is this place from the studio? Like if it takes us 15 minutes to get there and 15 minutes back, oh my gosh, all of a sudden that's a half an hour worth of driving. And we really just want to be at the studio. So we had this idea. So this space here with the stairs leading up to it, that wall is new. And it used to be just kind of a mezzanine storage area that looked sort of like that, where it just had a guardrail around the outside and it was open. to this space. And then pandemic hit, and I was like, you know what? We really just want to be at the studio. So why don't we turn this mezzanine storage space into a home? So it's kind of fun. My front door, my dad and I built together, but Brett Kern's wife, Abigail, does stained glass. And I contacted her to see if she could make me a stained glass window for our front door. And I asked her if it could be pots, and she said, sure. And her drawings, when she sent it back, were my pots, which was even better. But then, you come in the door and you are in a home, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
And we have quite the cup collection, which, has started to kind of take over all of the walls in our space. So we've got these huge cup racks. And, two wasn't enough. There's another one over here, and there's another one up there. And the cup cabinet is quite full also. So there's probably another one in the offing soon, because I feel like, you keep ending up with more and more cups. But over the years, both of us being potters, we have both collected tons and tons of pieces over time. And for a teaching tool, it's really wonderful, both for myself and then for whenever I have those workshops, or for our community classes. We're always pulling pots down from up here to show other people of, all of the various things that folks do along the way. Over here is one of my absolute favorites. This is a Betty Woodman piece, which I am so excited to actually get to live with and enjoy all of the time. And I don't know. So it's really wonderful to get to use pots and live with them and kind of think about all of the different ways that people answer the same question of function. And yeah, so that is kind of our domestic space in the studio.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, people are looking at their home where they live and thinking, well, where can I put a studio space? And you did it in reverse.
We definitely did it reverse. We had the like how can we make a living space within the studio space and make it functional and comfortable and a good place to be at home. It means it is difficult to get away from the studio. There are very kind of few days that we actually don't come into the studio in some fashion, because as soon as we go down the stairs to go outside, you're in the studio. So it's definitely very easy to be like, oh, I'll just uncover those pots at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, or oh, I'll just check on the kiln in the middle of the night, or any of that. But it's great. We both love it. So
Yeah. Oh, that's really great. Very cool. Well, I mean, this has been really a great to see both of your spaces. And just gonna bring everyone back here. So yeah, just thank you so much for showing us a little bit of what you're doing and where you're doing it. And I just want to remind people that this exhibition runs through the 7th of December. And you can go on our website, mainstreetartscs.org, and you can view all of the work in the show. And a lot of it is still available for purchase. So you could live with some pots by these two ceramic artists, which I would recommend for sure. And also work by 13 other artists. So definitely recommend that. And yeah, well, thank you both so much.
Thanks for having us.
thanks.